you wish you had left a residual force in Iraq? Any regrets about that decision in 2011?
Well, keep in mind, that wasn't a decision made by me. That was a decision made by the Iraqi government.
But this is what he said to Mitt Romney during the third presidential debate when President Obama was fighting for re-election.
Did you? Oh, you didn't want a status of forces agreement?
No, what I would not have done is left 10,000 troops in Iraq that would tie us down. That certainly would not help us in the Middle East.
So which is it? He didn't leave the troops there because he didn't want to tie us down. He thought that would hurt us in the Middle East. Or as he said last week, it was all the Iraqis' decision.
Well, we've been very clear that we were not going to leave any troops there without the legal protections that I think most Americans would agree they need to have overseas. So it is true that the Iraqi government made very clear they did not want our folks there in 2011. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of time to look at the history of what happened in Iraq, both when we got in and what happened throughout the years there. What we're focused on today is that the Iraqis have asked us to come back. They have asked for a number of troops to help shore up their army, to help them fight this threat today.
The generals have come on this show repeatedly and said that actually many of the Iraqis were begging for us to stay. And our own generals went to President Obama and begged him to keep about 17,000 troops on the ground in Iraq. He said no. They lowered it to 10,000. He said no. He marked it down to 3,000 troops. And that was not enough to make al-Maliki bite. Now he wants us to believe he had nothing to do with it.
Again, Megyn, look, we can debate what happened in 2011. I'm sure many people will be doing so over the coming days.
I just want to know what's true.
Okay, Colonel, you've seen that before, especially out of the State Department, Marie Harf. Was she answering the question when she was caught in what seems to be the president lying about reasons? Go ahead.
No, of course not. She wasn't answering the question. And I don't know where the State Department has found these spokeswomen that they've got lately, but they really are mental lightweights, Crane. Mm-hmm. And the way that they tend to answer these questions is similar to what the mental lightweight from the White House said when he was asked about the Benghazi phone calls. Hey, dude, that was like 2 years ago. They seem to think that anything that happened beyond yesterday or perhaps this morning's latest Twitter excitement is ancient history and doesn't need to be examined or is irrelevant for any decisions made today. I think that it's incumbent on all of us to recognize that nothing happens in a vacuum, and this has been a steady progression of ineptitude. And I won't hold the Bush administration harmless on this either. They made a lot of mistakes in the early days of Operation Iraqi Freedom, but later corrected them and in effect won the war. However, to secure the victory, what we needed to have was the status of forces agreement that Megyn Kelly was speaking of. And the Iraqis wanted that. They simply wanted some portions of it that we had disagreements with, and we wanted some parts that they had disagreements with. And typically this happens in every country. I mean, I've been involved in, tangentially at least, with status of forces agreements, for example, between the U.S. and the Republic of Korea for years. And we always have some, there's always some issue out there that one side or another needs to work out. And typically what you do, and that's what we pay diplomats to do, that really is the definition of diplomacy, is you work with the other side to come to a reasonable accommodation that may not be the ideal outcome for either side, but is acceptable to both sides. And we simply didn't do that. I mean, I think that the president sent Joe Biden over there not to secure a status of forces agreement, but frankly to kill it so that he could score political points with his base by saying, okay, I promised you that we'd end the war in Iraq and all American forces would be out, and I kept that promise. And I think that was what his full intent was, with nary a thought about what the consequences for that might be. or if they thought about the consequences, they discarded them as irrelevant to the need to secure political points at that particular time. And that was done, and there's no question about it. And all the dissembling and the nattering by these mental midgets from state or anywhere else isn't going to change the facts on the ground. And it's important from a historical perspective to realize every country that we've worked with, even if we haven't had a war there, we've got status of forces agreements with these people if U.S. forces are going to be based there. For example, we've got a status of forces agreement with Singapore, and that's a major Southeast Asian base. We've got status of forces agreements all over the world. These are not necessarily easy to do, but they're certainly within the realm of accomplishment. And we neglected to do that in Iraq. And now the president is sending over 300 special operators. We don't know what, we don't know what the rules of engagement are, but the rumor floating around is that they're supposed to be in a non-combat role. They're not going to be drawing combat pay. This just seems to me totally bizarre, and it's almost as if we've got an executive that wants the world to be the way the executive sees it rather than the way it really is, and that's a recipe for disaster from the start.
Because the people on the line that face the consequences on the front line are the soldiers, and they end up dead or injured. And I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm trying to tell the truth. And unfortunately, we always hear from the president and any politician, quite frankly, we always put our troops first. And we see what has happened with the VA scandal. We've seen a whole host of things, not to get sidetracked. My point is, when the president is not involved in reality, he's in theory, there are consequences for that. Would that
Absolutely.
be
This is the faculty lounge approach to foreign policy, and I think that these when you see the White House and the State Department and the both under Hillary Clinton and now under John Kerry, what you see is almost an academician's approach to life. That everything is theoretical, hypothetical. Probabilities are weighed and discussed, and once everybody's resolved it and in agreement, then they break and go have lunch. This isn't the way the world is. You've got to react to it the way people really are, and we've seen the brutality on the part of these Islamic fundamentalists, and ISIS certainly reflects that to a T. That's incomprehensible to Western observers. I mean, we take pains, we sacrifice soldiers and risk lives to avoid civilian casualties, and these people gleefully gun down hundreds, if not thousands, of innocents or people that they've arbitrarily declared their enemies because they may believe in a different form of Islam or not Islam at all, and then cut their heads off and line the roads with them and make videos of them, and are very proud of that. And and meanwhile, we just continue to do this pie in the sky stuff that you hear out of State Department, where it's all probabilities and hypotheticals, and kind of a wouldn't it be wonderful if kind of world, and I just find the whole thing appalling, and what makes it more so is exactly what you referred to, is that the lives on the line aren't going to be these theoreticians and political operatives and elected officials. It's going to be the soldiers, and they're going to pay the price, and we're going to have to look at the crocodile tears when the coffins come back into Dover Air Force Base all over again, and listen to the platitudes out of their mouths, and know that they don't mean a thing and that they couldn't care less.
And understanding that if they did know something, and they would take the feedback and change strategy. They would change course in some way to understand that their system is not working. That would be the reality. You get the feedback, say, okay, how do we achieve our goal? This isn't working. but they don't ever seem to realize that. And it's not because, I guess, that they're not stupid, Colonel, but they are placing ideology over reality. What is it?
It seems like that to me. I mean, I think that's as good a way to say it as any. It's even in our own lives, Crane. I mean, what's one of the most common expressions you hear these days? If you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results, it's a definition of insanity. Everybody, all the listeners have heard that a number of times, and yet we're watching this play out time and time again. The inept, almost willfully inept leadership at the executive, where they take pride in what they call leading from behind, which is a concept that's totally anathema to me. But they continue to do this. Well, if we're just nice, or if we just get everybody sitting around the table, we can come up with a solution. And this is I referred to this as the faculty lounge approach to foreign policy and war making, and that's exactly what it is. It's the kind of thing that you would expect to get out of fuzzy-headed professors who are tenured and don't have to worry about actually producing anything, which these people don't, and don't have to ever worry about being called for their mistakes, which these people don't, because we've got a compliant, indeed a cheerleading media that's willing to overlook scandals of the most grotesque proportions. And this is the road that they've chosen, and this is the road they're going to go down. And if facts and events get in the way of that, well, that's too bad. We're still going to do it because we think we're right. And we couldn't live our lives that way. We couldn't run our businesses or our families that way.
No, absolutely not. I'd like to jump to cut 18 for purposes of time. This would be the President of the United States speaking to the fact that, hey, we gave Iraq a chance. It didn't want it. So, well, roll it.
We gave Iraq the chance to have an inclusive democracy, to work across sectarian lines, to provide a better future for their children. And unfortunately, what we've seen is a breakdown of trust. There's no doubt that there has been a suspicion for quite some time now among Sunnis that they have no access to using the political process to deal with their grievances. So part of the task now is to see whether Iraqi leaders are prepared to rise above sectarian motivations, come together, compromise. If they can't, there's not going to be a military solution to this problem. There's no amount of American firepower that's going to be able to hold the country together, and I've made that very clear to Mr. Maliki and all the other leadership inside of Iraq.
Colonel, a couple things there, and I do not want to bring up something out of the blue, but just in reading, obviously going back and rereading your work, there were Iraqis who stood up and gave their lives to the Iraqi government and to what we were doing. And there was momentum, certainly not perfect in any stretch in the wonderful world of war and reality and life. The fact is, they were given that opportunity, and we played for you the Status of Forces Agreement, not securing that, but there were Iraqis who stood up, given their lives for an inclusive government, and the president said, well, we gave it a shot, now it's up to them. But he seems to be missing the fundamental idea of security and backup and the recognition that this is all about leadership. Am I being too hard on the president for making a statement that does not comport with the reality of actually having to change things and what it took to change things to get it going in a positive way, which it took place in the surge?
No, you're not being too hard on him. You're probably not being hard enough. The idea that somehow within a few years we're going to sprinkle some magic democracy powder over a place that's been at each other's throats for more than 1,000 years, ever since the death of Muhammad, actually, and that everybody's going to hold hands and sit around and sing songs together is ridiculous. One has to provide a security environment, and in the initial stages, that has to be a tough love type security environment. In other words, it can't be everybody runs around and does whatever they want. It's got to be highly structured, and in some cases even authoritarian for a short period of time. We can see that happen in South Korea. We can see in South Vietnam where there was no security there. We stayed in South Vietnam, in South Korea, and what we did then was provide a blocking force for the outside, the North and the Chinese, prohibiting them from coming in, and we allowed a democratic government to incubate there. It still took until 1987 before that happened. The war ended in 1953, so you're looking at 30-some-odd years, 34 years before it finally came to pass. Now it's established, and no one even thinks in terms of authoritarian governments over there. We did not do that in Vietnam. What did we do? We said, okay, we did the same thing that the current president is talking about in Iraq. We said, okay, you guys have a chance, go ahead and make it work, and left. So that the whole establishment, the whole government establishment, from the get-go was threatened. Not only, it was facing an existential threat, and was unable to cope with the existential threat while at the same time trying to build democratic institutions, because they didn't have the time, they didn't have the security. We pulled the same thing in Iraq without having the status of forces agreement. Once all the Americans left, security was up for grabs. The sectarians went at it again. Al-Qaeda came back. The corrupt politicians came to the front, and there was no U.S. presence there, or even an allied presence, to balance any of that off. So it was inevitable. There was no way around this. A lot of us saw this coming for a long time, and just felt very frustrated by it.
And we are going to continue our conversation a little later on this week. I hope and pray, Colonel, as we normally do on Friday.
Sure.
And I'm going to post the latest pic from the Valhalla website because it is just awesome, of the Colonel and man's best friend. And with that, we can always recognize that what that project is all about, which is serving those that have served us post 9/11 in a way of education and honoring them. Check out the Valhalla Project. Colonel Gordon Cucullu, our guest. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. AFR Talk.